Um, Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sharin Stories. I'm your host, Peaks, with my two beautiful co-hosts, Sarah States and the real St. Paul. This is not a therapy session. You will not find mental health professionals here, nor are we a substitute for said people. Today, we are lucky enough to invite someone with more inner strength than I would know what to do with. A full-ride Division I volleyball player. But the athletics world just wasn't enough for her. So as every athlete does, they try their hand in software engineering. Initially working for Apple out of college, she is now bringing a new startup into the forefront of the industry. On top of that, she has spoken at tech conferences around the world, a fabulous chef, a hell of a dog mom, and a loving coach. In the end, she can do it all. So let's all welcome Nikki Attea.
Woo! Damn.
Wow. Thank you.
How are you today, Nikki? Tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started.
I don't know, that was quite an intro. I feel like I have a lot to live up to based off of that. I'll try and speak as well as I can.
The beauty of that intro is everything that I said you've already lived up to. We're at the point where we've gotten to that, so you don't have to worry about consistently going past that bar.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a quick intro. I feel like I'm very much like Peaks and Sarah. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and after living around the world and the country for a little bit, I'm back in Buffalo, New York. So thanks for having me. Sorry, Paul, I don't know if I've lived where you've lived before.
You have, right? Well, Paul, you were in California, right?
Yeah, I grew up in San Francisco.
Oh, heck yeah, Bay Area. All right, then we all lived in the same place.
There's a little tidbit of information for all of his fans watching.
My fans.
So, Nikki, the way it kind of works is generally we're just gonna jump right into it. Before we start, before you kind of give us your story, do you have any questions for us?
Maybe I should have asked this before, but I mean, a big part of my story is about assault, and I don't know if you want me to like give a trigger warning like before I'm gonna start talking about assault, or if you guys are gonna maybe edit that in.
I mean, I think we just gave it there, but at the same time, we'll probably edit something in, and definitely at the beginning of the video. I know this is a heavy topic for people to listen to, but it's so important to kind of get these stories out if ever possible. So we are extremely excited. For you, there's nothing off limits. However, obviously, if you're not comfortable answering any of the questions that we bring up or have any issues with going forward on a certain topic, just end it there and we will move on to something else. All right. So if there's nothing else, Nikki, I'm going to hand the floor to you, and I am all ears now.
Okay. Just for some background, this is probably the first time I've ever told this story to anyone other than family members, my partner, and like my therapists. So this is a first, but I feel like my mental health journey and my story is kind of weird. I feel like I really didn't even think about my own mental health for like a good portion of my life before I got into a situation where I was forced to. But looking back, I feel like I've always had those struggles. Like they've always been there. I'm just a little bit more aware of them now. Like I mentioned, much like our hosts, I grew up in a normal middle-class suburban household. It's kind of a loaded statement, especially when you talk about mental health, because we all recognize our privilege, but it makes like struggling with mental health like that much more ironic. Like everything's okay, but like on the inside, sometimes everything's not okay. I'm no stranger to like high pressure situations or high stress, high anxiety. I grew up really defined by sports. I would run from like 2 or 3 practices in a day, like either before or after school. I would spend my weekends traveling with my dad all around the country, competing in tournaments. But I kind of thrived on that. I thrived on like a structure and a healthy level of performance anxiety. Like those feelings of stress are always there. And when you're competing at high levels, it's kind of an expectation that you can manage those different pressures, however they're applied. And to add another pressure, I was kind of expected at a very young age to earn a full ride scholarship and play D1. And that's all fine. I never questioned those things. I kind of just accepted it. And again, I recognize my privilege. I'm super fortunate to have been in that situation, but it's just important to my story because that was my identity. Like from when I was born to all the way up until when my mental health journey started, like being an athlete, being a competitive athlete was my identity. For a number of reasons, I chose to play volleyball at West Virginia University. If you know anything about the party culture there or the sports atmosphere, it's a wonderful little like college town, and I had like the best years of my life there. The school was everything I hoped and dreamed. Playing volleyball in college was amazing. I met the man that I'm supposed to marry in a couple months, pending COVID doom. But it's also home to some of like the more painful experiences in my life. Specifically, that happened one night in October 18th to be specific, but we were walking home on October 17th. Me and my roommates were coming home Friday night from a party. We actually had a dry season, so we were like stone cold sober, driving home back to our apartment, and actually had to leave kind of early because we had practice the next morning. So we were being super responsible, walking in our apartment, and by like some form of like herd mentality, we're all walking in together. We just thought we locked the door behind us because that's one of those things that are second nature. But obviously we didn't. And at some point during the night, a stranger entered our suite. It was like a 4-person or 4-room suite. He walked into my room, and he began assaulting me, like while I was asleep. I remember being like pinned down, face in my pillow, arms at my side, like couldn't move, and he like sat on top of me. He punched me, he choked me, he strangled me. And aside from like being unconscious, like to begin with, like I was literally like in deep, deep sleep. I kind of went in and out of consciousness a few times. And I don't know if it was coming from that deep sleep or just the repeated hits to the head, but I was in the moment like so disoriented. Like I didn't experience any of the feelings you would think you would feel when like your life is in danger. I didn't actually even think I was in danger. I thought it was kind of like a bizarre nightmare. And in that moment, I kind of felt like my body and my mind betrayed me. Like we're taught about that like fight or flight response, like when like what your body's supposed to do. But no one tells you about that like third option. There might even be 4. But what I experienced was like I froze. So I didn't fight, I didn't flight, I froze. My first initial reaction wasn't to like try and break free. It was shock. I didn't believe it was actually happening. And I think that was kind of the most terrifying part of it all. Once things started to get a little bit more like violent, and I started coming to like my senses of like this is it. Like I feel like my consciousness was slipping away again. Like I'm not going to be able to get out. I had to kind of force my brain into that fight mode and tried to like struggle the best I could. So anytime I would try and scream, he had his hands on my mouth, so those were muffled, but then that would kind of give me some opportunity to try and like reach around myself, while he was trying to like hoard off one like attempt at me getting away. But the struggle went on for a couple minutes. I'm not sure how long because I did lose consciousness a couple times, but once I was finally able to break free, kind of towards the end of my bed, he no longer had that like hold over me, and he bolted. Like as soon as I like broke free from his like grasp, he bolted. I remember it being kind of dark and just watching him like sprint out the room. Like I only saw the backside of him. I immediately like screamed like bloody murder, and my all of my roommates like came in, and we kind of just like looked at each other, and like they turned on the lights, like there's like blood on my sheets, and we were all like what do you do in that situation? Like we were all so confused. I didn't even know how to like explain it. It was perplexing, it was bizarre. And And honestly, it's a big reason why I haven't shared this story like openly and publicly before, because it's like not really a believable story. Like it's not something a lot of people experience. But the next few hours, or I guess it was kind of into the night, were kind of a blur. I think that shock set back in, and I felt like my body like wasn't my own. I felt ashamed. I felt embarrassed. I was afraid that I didn't want my roommates to call my coach. I thought that she was gonna like think I was partying or like got arrested or something and I was gonna get kicked off the team. I didn't want them to call my parents and wake them up and have them panic. I didn't want them to tell my boyfriend at the time, now my fiance, in fear that he'd think I was like damaged beyond repair, because it's not necessarily a thing you recover from quickly. And I didn't want anyone to know. I just wanted to forget that it happened, move past it. And, but like, there's something in my brain that constantly like went back to like, who the heck is this guy? Like, what was his motive? Like, why me? Like, it's at no point did I feel like I was being sexually assaulted. Like there was no motive. It was just like violence. And so what happened as a result of the assault was in ways a little bit more victimizing than what happened during it. They demanded I go in an ambulance, even though I could walk just fine. They asked for my statement at least a dozen times, whether it be a new cop that walked in the room and heard the story, an EMT, a nurse, a doctor. I had to like repeat in detail all of these things that had happened to me before I even had a chance to digest it myself. They stripped my clothes, they photographed my body, they scrubbed my nails and hair for any blood and DNA they could find. And I was pressured by a couple nurses to do a rape kit. And like I said, I knew my body. I didn't feel like I was sexually assaulted. And that's kind of where I drew the line. I was like, I'm already experiencing all of these really painful things. Like, I feel like a rape kit was just like way more victimizing. And I felt a little betrayed by the people there to help me. So I refused that. And then when I eventually got discharged from the hospital, so this is now like Saturday morning, it was a home game day. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever been to West Virginia, but for the listeners, the hospital parking lot is actually like the tailgate parking lot for football games. And I remember just like, I mean, people are out there by like 10 a.m., like partying all morning. And I just remember like walking out and seeing like seas of like blue and gold. Like my life had literally just been turned upside down. And like there's hundreds of people just like drinking and like having fun like everything was normal, which was really, really weird. And I don't know, I remember spending the rest of the day basically just like sleeping at my parents' or my coach's house until my family could make the drive down to West Virginia. My support system was unreal. Like they were taking care of me as best they could. They were cooking me my favorite meals, keeping me updated on like when my family was coming. And it was, I remember one of the biggest reliefs of my life, finally seeing them. Like my entire family, I think they drove down after one of Georgie's, like, it could have been a senior football game. They like drove down, like packed in a car right after. But to kind of touch back to like the legal side of it, the assailant was caught that night. He was passed out underneath a car, but not before he could do the same thing to two other women. And at the time, like the case, it was just so mysterious. Like even as more details started arising from the assault, like from each of the assaults that night, like I still couldn't piece it together. Like why me? Like why these two other girls? Like what is the intent? What is the motive? So I think that night, once my family was there, a lot of people suggested like, hey, the first night back in your apartment is going to be the hardest. Like, why don't you sleep there tonight? You'll have your family there and like it'll make it a little easier. And it did. Like I didn't feel like victim to the apartment, more victim of circumstance. But that was kind of like the first step of like, life isn't going to change. Life isn't going to stop. Like we wanted to like make it go back to normal. And life never really did slow down after that. Our coach canceled practice that Saturday morning, obviously, because she was in the hospital with me like all through the night. But I was at practice that next morning, preparing for a road trip to Baylor. I think I either got one more practice day in before we traveled off for like a Wednesday or Thursday match. And in my head, there was never really this option of like taking time off. I mean, people asked me if I was comfortable to play, if I wanted to, continue the season, if I wanted to practice. And like, I consented to it all. Like if had I stayed at home, had I not traveled, I would have been home alone. All my roommates were volleyball players. And I just craved feeling normal so badly. And I just wanted to get back to my routine. So within days of being attacked, I was back on the volleyball court, like literally playing matches that week. And I don't know if that was like helpful or hurtful to this day. I definitely didn't allow myself time to like process everything. I more just tried to like silence it and subdue it with normal activities. And I think that's one way to cope. I don't know if it's necessarily the right way to cope. But there weren't, I feel now I'm so like jealous. I feel like there's so many like advocates now, like there's content, there's like student athlete mental health, there's like podcasts like this that like help normalize that stuff, where it's like, hey, it's okay to take a break. But I feel like back then I didn't know that. So I just did what I knew. I just continued to play volleyball as that distraction. And then after that season had ended, we had like some big changes go on just within our volleyball program. My coach took a job at another school. So basically our whole team decided to transfer, including myself. And even when I had this like new opportunity lined up at a new school, I wasn't really allowed to train with the team anymore. Like after I announced that I was leaving. So in that like spring semester, I felt completely stripped of my identity, stripped of every distraction I thought I had from like keeping my thoughts from getting dark. Like things had really not like spiraled up until that point, but I felt really, really alone and abandoned. And that's when I started experience like the actual effects of the anxiety and the depression stemming from the PTSD. Not that I was never like warned, like I was kind of given a timeline for like, hey, it might like you might experience these things. But in those couple of months, I would get panic attacks so severe that I would miss class, or I would like end up crying and hyperventilating in my bathtub until like the panic attack subsided. I was prescribed basically every level of anxiety medication there was. All were pretty insufficient to treat my symptoms, except Xanax, which is one of the more addictive and like stronger ones, which is why it can sometimes be a little controversial. And then I took antidepressants to offset the anti-anxiety medications because they kind of work in opposite ways. And in some like social regards, I turned to other drug use the rest of the semester, craving some like normalcy, craving some normal college experience. But I also feel like that was a way to, like, I didn't have volleyball. Like what else was there? So yeah, I guess it was really frustrating dealing with all of this like really severe PTSD and not even knowing why, right? Like, who is this guy? And it was unsettling because we didn't know him. Like, it was a stranger. And all we had known were like the facts and stuff that the cops had presented to us. And I didn't really have money for a lawyer. We couldn't find a lawyer to like represent me, like pro bono or whatever. Like, it was just a weird situation, and we just pushed it off and didn't worry about that. But I had the feeling that I wanted to find him, find where his prison in West Virginia was, and visit him. which a lot of, I mean, actually I only told a couple people, but they all advised that I just shouldn't do that. But I felt like it was something I needed to do. Our talk was short. I learned that that night he was there for the football game. He was going out that night and he was heavily drugged by, I think to the extent of like bath salts. Like he didn't know he was doing bath salts, but someone gave him something like that. And he had no memory of that night, only the consequences of his actions that he heard from other people saying that he did these things while being handcuffed to a hospital bed. And maybe I am naive. Maybe I was at this like interesting inflection point in understanding my own Christian faith. But I just remember seeing like a 17-year-old boy in a prison, remorseful, guilty, and like apologetic. And I personally didn't believe that it was his intention to harm some helpless women, but I know some people might differ in that opinion. But I ended up forgiving him. I encouraged him to seek forgiveness and love for himself. And it weirdly like helped close that chapter and taught me a lot about forgiveness. But I think my healing like on my own was pretty far from over. After that like initial spiral, like this was all in like the time of like a semester. I feel like my identity as an athlete or as a person was never the same after that. I transferred to the University of Arizona. I played my last season of indoor, my first season of beach volleyball. But my mental game was shot. Like I had always thrived on like that healthy level of performance anxiety, like I kind of talked about earlier, but now that I had a taste for what like real panic anxiety like was, I feel like it kind of triggered that. Like I was so aware of that anxiety that when I felt it in any other like real sense, it was pretty like catastrophic. And I lost a lot of confidence in who I was as a player and as a person. I was playing under like new coaching staffs, new girls, like nearly like 30 girls between the two teams. And none of them knew like the severity of like the darkness I was like overcoming. Like I literally just like put on this face, like that had not happened. Like I only chose to remember like the good things to share with them. And I tried to use that as a way to restart, like new school, new friends, new life. On the outside, like I was competing in the top conferences in the country. I was being recruited by like big tech companies like Apple and Google. Like this was my senior year. It was supposed to be the best year of my life. I'm partying this like West Coast life like they do in Arizona. But literally on the inside, I was suppressing severe anxiety and depression during the day and consistent paranoia and nightmares at night. Like I literally feared going to bed like by myself, even though my roommate would be home sometimes and just a door over. Like I was over 20 years old and I was afraid to go to bed at night, and that felt kind of embarrassing too. But my only outlet was therapy and medication. Like volleyball no longer was my outlet. It honestly was more painful than anything at that point. And that's kind of how I felt transitioning into my adult life. I knew a professional volleyball career in Europe was like out of the question. It's incredibly isolating for someone who is like sound in their own mental health. And I knew that it would just exacerbate my symptoms. I was at a point where I was like terribly homesick. I had already been away from home for years. But I didn't want to move back home and like burden my like family and loved ones with like those struggles. Like I felt like every time I would bring that stuff up, like I knew how much it hurt my family. And so I stopped sharing it with them because I knew it hurt them. Like I kind of just wanted to take on that pain myself. So I chose tech. I chose a field that would keep me busy. I chose a field that took me to the Bay Area. I mean, it was my dream job. Like this is not all bad, but like there were a lot of things I considered in that decision. And it was literally another chance for me to like recalibrate. Like new city, new state. Like I get to invent myself again. Like, and I feel like it was just like this journey of me trying to do that each time. And as the time went on, I mean, time heals some of those wounds, but I wouldn't say that they necessarily heal all of them. I had a really close friend share this book I haven't read yet, but it says something to the extent of the body always remembers. And so the first anniversary of my assault was really, really hard. Each year getting a little bit better after that. But even at year 6, which was just a month or so ago, I still experience anniversary reactions, like days and weeks leading up to that date. Like my mind and body still enter like that protection mode. So I'm like a lot more sensitive to triggers. Even when I'm not even like consciously aware, like I don't always think about like October 18th, oh my God, that's coming up. I'm not even like consciously aware of it, but I'm still reminded of it in one way or another, like whether that materializes in panic attacks. I'm still kind of thankful for that, because while I used to feel betrayed by my body's and my mind's reaction to the assault, I now appreciate that it at least remembers and it still knows and it listens, and I'm just much more in tune with that. Almost there. I promise life gets happier, but daily triggers are pretty subtle, but now that I'm aware that they happen, I accept them, I can deal with them, I can try and let them go. Sometimes that doesn't always work. I'm in no way like symptom free and like healthy. Like I still need the occasional Xanax to treat my anxiety. But that's okay too. I've kind of accepted my own way to overcome and heal. I got to a point where I kind of wanted to like wean off of all medication. Like I weaned off of the antidepressant like medication. I didn't want to feel dependent on taking a pill every single day. I know a few of you guys have had similar stories. I wanted to feel as authentically as I could. I stopped therapy because while it was an outlet, it was also like a constant reminder, and I was just ready to move on my own and still feel the pain, but feel it in a way that I like allowed it to happen. And I think to this day, I still kind of crave community where I can like relate and empathize with other survivors. Like to my knowledge, there aren't a lot of like specialized support trauma groups that I would fit into. I remember like when the Me Too movement was happening, I was like super, super like happy and like proud of women that they like felt comfortable enough sharing their own like painful experiences. But like I didn't quite check that box either. I kind of felt a little ostracized there. But I think things like that were really inspiring. So I feel like this podcast is kind of my way of reclaiming that. And sharing my story here publicly is kind of like my I got assaulted by a dude on bath salts like support group, as like bizarre as that sounds. Like that will never exist. Like that's never going to be a real thing. But I think if you're listening right now, like that's like you're a part of that community now, because I chose you to be. And if you've listened over the years, like you definitely know who you are, but I am even more thankful that you've chosen to listen. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've rambled. I don't know if I've gone over on time or anything, but I think the most important.
Totally fine.
Sorry?
It's totally fine.
You're doing fantastic. Time is fine.
Yeah, I think transparency has been the most important thing, and like platforms like this, I think have allowed people to be more transparent. I've become more comfortable with being transparent about my own stories because I've heard other people just not even just go through the same thing, but just like be able to say like screw it, like, and share it themselves. But I don't know, that's my story. I really appreciate you guys.
No, thank you.
We really appreciate
Yeah.
you. And so much. There's so much definitely to talk about here, and I'm definitely excited to get more into it. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing your story. First of all, I'm curious. Did you ever get a chance to talk to the other two women, personally?
I won't. So one of them, I think he broke into her apartment, but I'm not sure the extent that she was like physically assaulted. So she wasn't at the hospital. I never got the chance to talk to her, but the other woman, was at the hospital at the same time as me. I think she was assaulted. I think I was the last one, like in the order. She was second. But I mean, you guys know what I look like in person, but just for people that don't, I'm 6'3". I think in college I was like 175 pounds. Like I'm a pretty big girl, and like I think it would be hard for any like grown man to like pick me up and like throw me around like a rag doll. This other girl who I did become close with, I did connect with, I did meet through this whole thing. Like that was not the case. Like she was a really like small framed girl. I remember seeing her walk across like the hospital floor like in a neck brace. Like I think the extent of my physical injuries could have been a lot worse, and my heart kind of breaks for her as well. But through it all, we have like kept in touch, and like we've had each other to kind of talk about that, because we both know like we're like, well, we can't go to a support group and talk about this thing. It's a lot of it's directed towards like sexual assault like survivors, which is not a bad thing at all, that they have that kind of support. But ours is just so unusual that we really kind of only had each other to talk specifically about those things. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything about that you wanted me to share in detail, but
No, I honestly, I just wanted to see kind of if you had a chance to talk to them, and really anybody who's gone through. I think you keep acting as if your assault is like a one-off. I mean, you were assaulted. That's it. There's no other way around it. It's not. I was assaulted by a guy on bath salt. You were just assaulted. Do you talk to have you ever talked to any other people who have just been assaulted in any way, or is it generally just this other person that you had to go through the same experience with?
I would say.
And how does that help? Because I think I'm leaving that part out. Or does it help?
I think it definitely helps. I think, unfortunately, I know a lot more like sexual assault survivors like within like my own like close circle of friends than I do just like regular physical assault. Not that one is any more or less like common to happen. Like I think that circumstance could happen to anyone. But I do find some community in that, absolutely. Like one of my best friends was like assaulted and mugged in a parking lot. One of my best friends was sexually assaulted like shortly after this whole thing happened, like all within like a very like short amount of time. So having those like 3 outlets of women was really, really great. But in times like sometimes it is like it's heavy shit. So sometimes it is a lot to kind of unpack for other people, and sometimes it's helpful to know like, okay, I've been through this, I know how to make them feel better as well, or at least just be like a sounding board or a listening board for them. So I don't know, I mean, it's not always going to be like sunshine and rainbows. I think whenever you're having these like difficult conversations with people, like there's pros and cons to it. But I think personally, as someone who craved that community, it was always good to talk to someone, no matter what their experience was, even though it didn't directly relate to like my exact experience. Like their like trauma is trauma. Like you said, like assault is assault, trauma is trauma. Like you're gonna experience some of those same like symptoms and like
Right.
healing process.
I know, like my heart just broke when you said during your telling of your story, like you haven't really talked to so many people on a public scale about this because of the believability factor of your story. I mean, that just like, it's just such a terrible idea that someone could face such trauma and then not be able to talk about it because no one's going to believe me. And I mean, I know that that's something that is talked about so often these days, especially with yeah, I guess like the introduction of the Me Too movement and things like that, it's like with so much overload, some people do bring up the fact like, oh, is that even really believable? Or like, is that something that really happened to this person? Or is it more of like a cry for attention or something like that? And I mean, I think we all know at this point that that's just not true, that these stories are true. Like there's validity to these things. And you saying that really was hard to hear. And also the idea that, which I've heard before in other stories, not on this podcast, but when the aftermath of your trauma, like that same night, going to the hospital and feeling betrayed by these people that are meant to help you, like just by like the fact that the police would like question you several times, when like we know that like retelling these traumatic things are hard. I mean, it's like, and you didn't have the time to process it yet. And I think like there is something there that needs to be sort of reworked, like the sort of process of processing these things that happen, so as to limit or sort of like put a cap on or like help the healing process. Because I'm sure like for you, that sort of trauma, even post the actual event, is something that was carried with you later on. So I think like, I'm not sure what that sort of solution is, but I think you bring up such a good point that women of assault do deal with quite frequently, which is believability and the sort of hopelessness within the processing of these events.
Yeah, like I feel like there's so many layers of like victimization, like the believability being one of them, or people just like victim blaming, like yeah, we should have locked our freaking door. And I think people like they shared that notion, and I don't think people that said things like that had any like malicious intent. Like it is a fact, if we had our door locked, maybe he wouldn't have entered. But like in a sense, that's still like victim blaming, you know, like we were all like equally responsible for that. And gosh, I don't know. And I think in the legal system there needs to be a little bit of reform too, because I knew to an extent when people like when cops were asking me over and over, I was like, maybe they just want my story to be straight. Maybe they want to make sure I'm being like consistent about it. But I feel like that's just rooted in such an awful place where like you literally just can't believe the victim. Like the dude was handcuffed to a bed, like doors down. Like it was pretty like, thankfully our case was pretty like close and shut. Like the evidence was all there, the stories lined up. I didn't have to go to court and experience this like re-victimization that a lot of like women or just survivors of assault have to do. But not having trust that like the system is going to do the right thing for you is like really sad and terrifying. And fortunately I didn't experience like the terrible, like it could have been worse in that regard. But I don't know. I do realize that there's a lot of room for like growth and improvement there, like for like people in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think the term like victim shaming and things, I mean, even other people do it constantly. I mean, like you said, you have people who just don't even realizing sometimes they're doing it. And I think a lot of times we also tend to do it to ourselves. I think a couple of sentences that you said that kind of jumped out at me is like, you felt like your body and mind betrayed you. You felt like your body wasn't your own during the time. Did you ever like convince yourself that you felt like blame on just not being able to, be in this situation or whatever it might be? I don't know exactly how I'm trying to ask this, but like, did you end up victimizing yourself ever?
I think so. And I feel like I victimized myself in like being too like weak throughout it all. Like I've never like been in like a physical fight or altercation other than this, but I feel like my personality is pretty confrontational. So the fact that like someone completely confronted me and like assaulted me and tried to like, I'm trying not to be as graphic, but I mean, and I like my life was threatened, and I feel like my first reaction wasn't like fight mode, like get the hell out of there, like that, like what I thought I knew about myself was that my first reaction would be to fight, but I was so confused, and I feel like my body was in shock and it didn't. So I kind of shamed myself for that. Like it felt like a sign of weakness that like I wasn't able to get out of the situation myself until minutes and minutes of struggle or like whatever. But I don't know. Like, yeah, and I don't think that helps, but I think in some ways we're kind of like conditioned to blame ourselves. I mean, if in society we have these like subtle ways of like victim blaming others, like what stops us from victim blaming ourselves? So
yeah, totally. Nikki, for people that don't know, you were one of our mini stories, and you know, like you shared the fact that you were assaulted and part of your story. And obviously this today is like going into a lot more detail surrounding the events of that night. And it wasn't like that far of a time in between, like after six years, I guess you said it was this past few weeks. And now like you've told your story in a way twice within the past, like, I don't know, has it been like a month or less than a month? Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, like, how are you feeling like having this out there?
Right now I feel like there's like a weight lifted off of me, and I think I felt a really similar thing when I shared my mini story as well, which is like why I became more comfortable to like share it in person. I know I like choked up a couple times, but like I can't go into a doctor's office and like recollect like these things without like bawling. So I don't know how I like managed to do it without crying. Like I cried about everything, like literally. But I just remember after sharing the mini story, having like an overwhelming like wave of support from people, like a lot of which that were like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't know this happened. A lot of which that were like, us survivors have to like stick together. And in a sense, it's like, okay, now I'm understanding that you are also a survivor, like yourself. And that's another like layer of it. I don't know. It just felt really, really empowering. I had people sharing stories with me privately that is somewhat related to it. So one of which brought me to tears. It was like someone who was a little bit younger and had looked up to like the volleyball team, like being in West Virginia. And I don't know. I felt like if just that small snippet of something was that releasing for me, it's like why not share all of the other details? Like why not share the whole story? Because I used to think like why who needs to know this about me? Like who, like this, it's so bizarre. It's such like, it's the weirdest story in the world. But I was like, I'm not going to share this unless there's like meaning to. I just saw Matt creep in the back.
Yeah, me too.
But yeah, I mean, I've found a lot of purpose in this, and I'm not crying. Like I feel good. Like I want to go have a glass of wine with Will, and like
let's go.
I just feel like this is just like another like a thing that I conquered. Like I don't know. I thought I would feel so much worse after like talking about it, and now maybe I'm just at a different point in my life where I can talk about it, but I don't know.
It was not different when it's on your own time. And I mean, this is obviously, like you said, it's a process of healing, and there are certain things that you may never fully recover from. But yeah, I think telling your story when you're ready to tell it is so important.
Mm-hmm.
I think key is ready to tell it, right? Like it could be 1 to 6 years, it could be 30 years. It just when you're ready to tell it, try and find someone who's ready to listen. Yeah. So I do have like 2 more questions for you that I almost need to ask, because I think something so unique and impressive about your story is that you went to go visit him. That is not something you hear really ever. I'm sure people have done it. I'm sure other people do it. And you said the two to 5 people that you talked about said like, no, don't do it. It's a bad idea. I want to hear, are you are you, if someone says, I want to go visit this person, are you for it or against it moving forward? Would you say that it's better to confront in this situation or not?
I think in my case, I am thankful I did it. I think I got what I needed out of doing that. I think it's going to depend on the case and the person. Like legally, like he was already in jail, like the case had already like finished or whatever. He was already sentenced. Like I think lawyers ended up they did find out like what I like shared with him. Like one of the victims like talked to him. So I know that was still like, I don't know. I think it can be compromising in certain situations, especially with like ongoing like legal cases. But I would never discourage someone from doing that if they felt like it was something they had to do. But I would discourage it if it was coming from a place of like anger or resentment or whatever. Like I feel like it was unique. I didn't know the person. I didn't think this person was coming after me. Like if this was maybe like an ex-husband who had physically assaulted me, like maybe I wouldn't like flame the fire, you know, but for whatever reason, I felt called to do this. And I think the circumstance that we were in, I felt safe enough to do it. But I gave you the most vague answer, but I feel like it is such a case by case basis. And you need to consider like legal implications. You need to consider like your own intent. Like you really just need to know your own heart. And I just wanted like closure from it. I was like who is this dude? Like you literally, if a single person or incident changed the course of my life forever, and I know nothing about that person whatsoever, like I needed closure in that moment. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think if you're looking for the right things, it can be okay. But you know your own heart and your own intent behind it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I do think we have to end it there. I definitely am so just thankful that you chose us to kind of give the whole story. I'm so happy to kind of know this a little bit more about you, Nikki, because I know you pretty well, but nothing, I don't know too much. I don't know the in-depth stuff. But it is awesome to finally kind of get to know this about you. And if there's anything you'd like to plug right now, or I don't know what you're doing currently, if you want people to watch your volleyball games, I don't know what gym they're probably closed right now, but there's anything else you'd like to finish off with, anything you'd like to say at the end, feel free now.
Gosh, I don't really have a plug. I wish I was doing something more of value.
No, you are. We're always talking about you. We're like, oh my God, Nikki has like real jobs. She's so cool. She's so smart. Like I literally say that like once a week.
That's a real job.
Rachel Rachel says it 3 times a week, right?
Yeah, that's literally how I feel. I'm always like, look at Nikki. I mean,
everyone has real jobs here.
I literally, Nikki, I went to work today and I played basketball for like an hour and a half with a group of little kids. And then I then decorated a Christmas tree and I passed out lunches. I don't have a real job.
In the cutest shirt ever, Pete.
Yeah, thank you. My Slytherin.
Oh, I thought it was like a pilgrim shirt for a second.
No, it's just a little Slytherin.
Oh.
Just so the kids know that I'm not the nice one.
I'm a Slytherin.
Oh, nice. Good work. So thank you so much, Nikki, for coming on. Thank you all for listening. I hope you all enjoyed the episode and like and subscribe.
Sorry. I'm going to make you repeat that, and you might have to edit out me interrupting you. If I can just share one thing, like whatever the plug is, I just want to share contact information, like for myself. I'm going to share it in the form of Instagram because it's a lot easier. My handle is Nikki Cuddle. It's NIKKICTL. My name's Nikki Attea on there, at least for the next couple months. I don't know what your follower base is. I don't know what your listener base is, but if they like feel like they relate to this in any way and want to talk about it, or anything like that. Like I can just offer whatever, like, I don't know, love and support and advice I can. I feel like that is like the only thing of value that I can offer right now or share. But I feel like if anyone is in a situation that I was feeling like I was kind of like lost and alone for so many years, and I can just like cut that off where it can, and you relate to this in any way, I would love to hear from you, I guess.
At Nikki NIKKICTL. All right, everybody,
Thanks,
please
Nikki.
put that on. I'm sure there will be some people who would love a little ear, and that's some pretty priceless information in terms of valuability. So don't worry there. So thank you all. I am not going to really repeat it because we probably won't edit it out. And I hope you like or subscribe below. All of you have a wonderful, wonderful night. And thank you all. Thank you very much, Nikki, for everything.
Thanks, Nikki.